Today, we welcome a political duo who, despite their differing political views, are longtime friends. Together in 2005, Bob Beckel and Cal Thomas began writing a column for USA Today called Common Ground, where they regularly demonstrate that people with strikingly different political views can reach agreement on contentious issues if they place the interest of America ahead of political gain or personal advantage. Bob Beckel is truly a Washington insider whose combined experience in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and on dozens of election campaigns informs his political savvy and election analysis. Currently a graduate professor in advanced political strategy at George Washington University, Beckel is a regular Democratic political analyst for Fox News. Wielding his sharp wit and in-the-trenches experience, Bob Beckel is regularly sought after for his strategic analysis and political acumen. Cal Thomas is the most widely syndicated political opinion columnist in America. He is a 36-year veteran of broadcast and print journalism and a panelist on the popular show Fox News Watch. Thomas has been honored with numerous awards for his work, including a George Foster Peabody Team Reporting Award and awards from both the Associated Press and United Press International. A writer of force and clarity, Thomas has authored more than 10 books, including his latest release, The Wit and Wisdom of Cal Thomas, as well as a book with his friend Bob Beckel, Common Ground, How to Stop the Bipartisan War That is Destroying America. Although Beckel and Thomas often disagree, they do so with humor and civility and avoid questioning the other's motives or patriotism. They believe this could be a model for a new generation of politics. Drawing from their column and their book, Common Ground, theirs is a discussion of how liberals and conservatives can work together to put America back on track. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob Beckel and Cal Thomas.
Look at this. Wow, what a crowd. This is terrific. Thank you all for having us. We're delighted to be here from Washington. We have a lot of experience with your industry because we have to deal with bull up there all the time. Okay, it's a cheap joke, but it was good. You know, when I think of your industry and beef, I think one of the best commercials I've ever seen to promote your product, that great Robert Mitchum commercial, "Beef, it's what's for dinner." I can't get as low as he did. That was a great commercial. I wish you'd rerun that, or I guess you'd have to pay royalties to his estate. I thought it was effective. I thought it had authority. I thought it was great. So thanks for having us. I want to begin with a quote from your CEO, which I found really interesting and appropriate for what Bob and I want to share with you today. Forrest Roberts wrote in the latest, I guess it's the latest one I got, the NCBA newsletter, ag groups share a great deal of common ground. Whether producing beef, growing corn, or manufacturing fertilizer, our interests are far more similar than they are different. We all suffer when Americans' trust in agriculture wanes, and we've all watched in dismay as activists lead a very public conversation about how food should be raised in this country. Well, I want to substitute for one word here, the word government. We all suffer when our trust in government wanes. And I think that's where we are today. The ratings for Congress are in single digits. The president's approval ratings are weak. People just don't trust in their political leadership anymore. And the cynicism that is abroad in the land in both parties is unlike anything I have seen in all of my years in Washington, and I was born there. People hate politics. And if they hate politics, it soon begins to lead over into a distrust of government. Now, why common ground? Is this some kind of shtick that Bob and I do, a dog and pony show to entertain the masses? No, we're actually quite serious about it. You know what the problem is if you watch cable TV or listen to some talk radio. what you have on television? You have a host and two guests. One guest says to the other, hey, you're ruining America. And the other one responds, no, you're ruining America. Well, you're a commie. Well, you're a fascist. Well, you're a secular humanist. Well, you're a Bible-thumping bigot. And the host says, and we'll be back with more civil discussion after these messages. Come on. Real Americans don't believe half of that stuff. Bob and I have both been called by program bookers and asked what our opinion is on a particular subject and passed over in favor of someone else. Well, I asked one once, I said, hey, why won't you have us? Well, we want somebody edgier. They want people fighting. They want the equivalent of wrestling, smackdown, blows struck, because it helps with the ratings. But does it help the country? We don't think so. Now, the essence of common ground is that we're not wimps. We're not saying that we don't really believe in what we believe in. We do. But we believe in something higher than that. I'm still a conservative. I haven't compromised my principles. Bob is still wrong, but that's all right. We live in America. No gestures, please. There's plenty of room for people of different opinions, and many opinions. Yeah, he's challenged in many ways. But look, here's why I'm a conservative. I believe in principles that work. We didn't just crawl out of a cave. We don't have to invent the wheel or discover the use of fire. We have a history, an economic history, a political history, a long history, and we can look back to see what worked in the past and apply it to our own age with certain updates and adjustments that make it relevant for our time. When I was growing up, I learned some lessons from my parents. First of all, I learned to live within my own means, not to let your reach exceed your grasp. Always pay the bank. Don't charge things that you can't afford to pay for. Now the attitude is that we're all entitled to stuff. Anything we like, anything we want, and if we can't pay for it, the government will pay for it. Well, the government is us, and we're paying for it. When I was growing up, we penalized and discouraged the things we wanted less of and subsidized and encouraged the things we said we wanted more of. Now it's all switched. We penalize and discourage the things we say we want more of and subsidize and encourage the things we say we want less of, and then we're shocked to find we get more of what we want less of and less of what we want more of. Does that make sense? It's crazy. Look at what is modeled in our culture. You can't go to a grocery store and look on the magazine rack. Who do we feature now? Do we feature men and women of integrity, fidelity, commitment? No, it's the latest celebrity who's living with another celebrity, having babies out of wedlock. This week they're married to a man, next week they're married to a woman. Doesn't matter. It's all a matter what you think and what you feel at a given moment. This is not the America I grew up in. I believe there are always certain things that are right and wrong. But now we've been taught that if you think something is right and the other person thinks something is wrong, you have to agree so as not to hurt their feelings because they might go out and shoot up the post office. Listen, knowing right from wrong is a good thing. So I'm a conservative because I believe in these long, tried and true principles that work for all Americans, regardless of their political, ethnic, racial, or religious background. And now Bob is going to give you another opinion. Bob?
That was interesting, Cal. It was long, but it was interesting. First of all, let me just say right at the outset, I got to put my clock on here because Cal gets mad because I talk.
Yeah,
because I make so much sense. First of all, it's nice to be with so many liberals in one room here today. I feel really at home. I must say, I found one. He was a busboy in the back. I thought he was a liberal. He said, "Sorry, sir, I love Ronald Reagan." And I said, "Okay, fine." Hey, by the way, has anybody else gotten lost in this hotel? Yeah. If you guys wouldn't mind not getting lost, all you drunks last night, right under the window of my bedroom, I've been able to sleep last night. I mean, I don't know what the cows are doing today, but I know what you were doing last night. Unbelievable. Now, I'm a liberal, and that means that there's no expectations here, right? I could drool and I get a good mark, right? But I want you to understand there are liberals and there are liberals. Don't make assumptions about things that you think you know. I'll tell you my favorite story about expectations. There was a southern state senator, a Democrat, going around the South in 1960 saying, "We can't run with Kennedy, he's a Catholic. We cannot have a Catholic at the top of the ticket. He's going to kill us if we have a Catholic." And it got so bad, the Massachusetts State Democratic Party was in convention that spring. They invited the old boy up. And sort of like they did with me back here, they said, Bob, this is not exactly your crowd out here. And they said, Senator, out in that room, there's a lot of Irish Catholics. Out in that room, there's a lot of Italian Catholics. Out in that room, there's a lot of Portuguese Catholics. I know now you're worried about my anti-Catholic feeling. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Gets to the podium, sure enough, he says, I want to say at the outset, I love Italian Catholics. I love Irish Catholics. I love Portuguese Catholics. It's them damn Roman Catholics I can't stand. So I would just encourage you to understand that there are different kind of liberals. You know, there are liberals who go to Harvard, and they never invited me there, or they did once, threw me out. And then there are liberals who are jobs liberals like me. I mean, I don't believe, I'm an environmentalist, but I don't believe in stopping an entire dam because of a snail darter, for example. My father called me up, who was a labor organizer, has passed away, and he called me one day. I was doing Crossfire. He said, what's this spotted owl thing? I said, well, Papa, it's a endangered species, needs old growth forest. Well, why don't it go to new forests? It's probably more food. I said, no, it doesn't work that way, Dad. He said, well, how many jobs? I said, about 25,000. 25,000 jobs in an owl? He said, give me my effing shotgun. I can handle that. So you got to keep in mind these things there are somewhat, liberals there are a lot of different liberals. Well, there aren't a hell of a lot of us, but I mean, those if there are, we're different. One of my best friends, my two best friends in the world are Cal Thomas and Sean Hannity. It tells you that when I was drunk, I lost every brain cell I had. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I just celebrated 12 years sobriety a couple of weeks ago. By the grace of God, I can tell you. But the other thing you might be surprised to know, all you right-wingers, is that I owned a cattle ranch in Townsend, Montana, called the Grassy Mountain Ranch. It was actually a dude ranch, but we leased out grazing rights to ranchers in the area. And I had my own experience with government, and here's what it was. Now, when you lease grazing rights, you know you've got to have like feed, something they can graze on, like grass. And another essential part of life is water, right? You got to have water. Well, the pond that we had built, that had been built there years before, the dam breaks, and it's running out. And we got to get water to all these cattle. So we put a dam up. And you know what happened? The Bureau of Land Management comes in, and the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers said, you built the dam wrong. So what the hell does that mean? We had to stop the dam. You get cattle, you got drink? No, $2,000 a day. $2,000 a day. I learned a little bit about that back then. Then, of course, we sold it for ranchettes. My partners did for 100-acre ranchettes to a bunch of California pretend cowboys, and then the place burned down in the fire. So that was my entire ranching experience. Let me just follow up a little bit about the common ground. I'll tell you why there's so much polarization in Washington is because both political parties have gone to the extremes. They're controlled by the Republicans on the right and the Democrats on the left. The rest of America is not like that. We poll people all the time, ask them what you should do about common ground. Should you sit down and try to work things out? 85% of the American people think that there's not a subject short of abortion that we cannot, with reasonable people, sit down and work out, but not in Washington. Because it's impossible. You got the Tea Party people on one side, you've got Barney Frank on the other. They won't talk to each other. They don't like each other. And in the meantime, the people's business is not getting done. You can cut these deals. When we had good, solid moderates around, and they weren't bought and paid for by big PACs, although I know that you guys filled your PAC up pretty well. I've watched you. I watched you all operate in Washington, and you've got a very good Washington operation. You really do. I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for the EPA guys who had to go up against you on that dust thing or whatever it was. Now, I'm a firm believer that politicians have long ago left the understanding of the grassroots of America. They are living on an island unto themselves. And I'll tell you, the time is going to come, not because we preach common ground up here. We've been to virtually every state talking about this. It's not going to be because of us. It's going to be because of you and at the grassroots. And here's the answer to it. You're going to end polarization and gridlock in Washington when you start losing elections because you're a polarizer, not because you're a polarizer. And that's the problem. You need to start paying these people a price. They need to pay a price at the polls for being polarized. Now, so I can keep on time here, why am I a liberal? Don't. I saw that, okay? Just give me a break, okay? I'm a liberal. It's very simple. It comes down to this. Last night, someplace in southern Nashville, a baby was born to a crack mother. Now, the mother should not have had that baby, but it wasn't the baby's fault. Last night, someplace in suburban Nashville, in a rich white area, a baby was born to a wealthy couple. I don't believe those two babies have an equal chance at the American dream. That child born to the crack mother should be fed, clothed, housed, given medical care, the best education possible, and the safest environment. And if their mother can't pay for it, then you have to pay for it. And I pay for it. And God knows Cal can pay for it. But that's the difference. Most conservatives see a lesser role in government or no role in government. If you're Ron Paul, you think that it doesn't exist, right? But I believe that in the end, there really is something about a village of people who have a responsibility for one another. That separates, I think, liberals from conservatives in a whole lot of ways. And on that note, I'm going to get off because Cal's looking at me because I'm over my time. Now he's going to come and give you some more right-wing stuff, and you'll be happy, and I'm sitting down.
Well, as you might expect, I'm not an all or nothing in government, and neither are you. What conservatives want to do is simply put government back into its constitutional boundaries, which the founders decided worked best. Big difference. But having said that, let's talk a little bit about what Bob and I agree on. You'll find this in our book, Common Ground, How to Stop the Partisan War That's Destroying America, which we hope you'll go online and get because if the Bush tax cuts expire, Bob's going to need the money to pay the government some more money. One of the things we agree on is term limits. Now, I believe in recycling trash and Congress for the same reason. It's a disease in Washington. You see them, it doesn't matter if they're Republicans or Democrats. When they're elected the first time, they all come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We're going to be more moral than the other guys who you just kicked out. We're going to be the most ethical administration or congressman or senator that they've ever seen before. They all say this, and I just, we take little office pools, and when the first corruption is going to break out, the first sex scandal, somebody caught in the Minneapolis toilet tapping their foot, and all this other stuff. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you just can't. The joke writers are having a hard time exceeding this. So, Nancy Pelosi said she was going to drain the swamp. Instead, she built a hot tub. But it works the same way, In either party, it's a disease. I mean, if you go into a disease-infected area, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, you're going to catch the disease. And the disease in Washington can only be solved, in my judgment, by term limits. So Bob and I have agreed on that. We also agree on school choice. It's amazing some of my liberal friends who are so adamant about choice on abortion are against choice for education for those children fortunate enough to be born. Competition works. It works in everything. It works in your industry, it works in journalism, works in politics, but it doesn't work in government. Government wants to maintain a monopoly on the school system so that it can keep getting money, the politicians, from the teachers' unions. We have choice in almost everything else, computers, software, milk, sodas, everything you have a choice on except education. We need to free especially the poorest and the most underperforming schools so that minority kids especially can get a ticket to a better life, and that only comes with a better education. We also agree that countries that benefit from American troops ought to start paying the bill. We should have sent Iraq. We should have sent Iraq a bill for what we did for them, and we ought to send one to Afghanistan. And any nation or nations that benefit from the sacrifice of American blood and treasure ought to start picking up the bill. We cannot as George McGovern said, hello, we cannot be the policeman of the world. We cannot right every wrong. We can't go everywhere, and we certainly can't afford to pay for it all. Bob and I agree it was a complete outrage that when oil leases were leased by this new government in Baghdad, they went to China and Russia. They should have gone to, we ought to be driving on 30-cent gallon of gasoline again in this country, or at least get cheaper oil from those people. The French, the Germans, the South Koreans, all these other places, the Japanese that have benefited for years from the American protection from our nuclear umbrella ought to be paying the bill. So we agree on that as well. Nuclear energy. We certainly believe that's the future, not all by itself, but in a combination with other things. We've got to free ourselves from paying these Middle East mullahs all this money that especially the Saudi Arabians can use to undermine the values and principles and beliefs that we believe in. They're using our oil money to fund terrorism around the world, to print textbooks that they use in their schools that teach that Jews are descendants of apes and pigs and are the cause of AIDS, and that Christians are polytheists, cross worshipers, and all must be destroyed. And we're funding that with our oil money. I got a bumper sticker for this campaign, and it says, "Let them eat sand."
Yeah, I became particularly acute and strongly in favor of term limits when the Republicans took over the House. I wasn't quite as strong about it when we controlled both chambers, but the problem with, just quickly on term limits, the argument they give for not having term limits is you need these veterans around. These people have been around a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, all they do is know how to scam the system better. That's why they're veterans. They know how to get everything done. Get them out, send them home, As Cal often says, the only politicians in Washington with convictions are in jail.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you a little bit. So I agree on nuclear power. I grew up next to the first nuclear power plant in America, the Connecticut Yankee Power Plant. I used to swim there in February. The water was warm, which may be why I'm still a liberal. I don't know, but... And then on top of that, I played football for 17 years, so I guess the combination keeps me over on the left. I'm the last middle-aged white guy who's a liberal in America, and they've got a place for me in the Smithsonian, right next to the dodo bird. But it's okay. I'm going to continue to fight on. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this election. Did you just hear? Did you say something?
No. I'm hanging on your every word.
Is there? Yeah, sure you are. Is there an echo in here?
You're hearing from aliens.
Oh, by the way, last night I get in the elevator, and this dude, one of you are out here, walks on the elevator, and he recognizes me from television. He says, "Beckel, don't give any of that liberal bullshit today." And I said, and he was carrying a box. I said, "What's in the box?" He said, "It's a high-powered rifle." I said, "I won't talk about those commie sons of bitches. I can guarantee you that." Whoever you were, you scared the hell out of me with that thing, man. So put the damn thing away, will you? I know it's been open hunting season. I have to defend Obama every day. You know what that's like sometimes? It's like being the only fire hydrant at the Westminster Dog Show. So give me a break, all right? Now listen, though, I know all you want to see Republicans take over in the House and the Senate, and you want to see one of these guys get elected President of the United States. As much trouble as Obama was in and is in, it comes down to Mitt and Newt, which sounds like some kind of candy bar, and Ron Paul is mind-boggling to me. I'm happy with it, don't get me wrong, but here's the problem. Newt has never had an unspoken thought in his life. I've known him a long time. And Romney's problem is, he's a decent guy, but you can't graft the personality onto people. He makes some and excels plummet every place he goes. He's a nice guy, but, come on. So it's going to be a close race, but you got to be careful what you ask for. You think it's a good idea to have all Republicans in the House and the Senate and the White House? First of all, you're going to get them in the House. They'll hold the majority. In the Senate, Republicans will not take over the chamber, but it'll be close. Here, you son of a bitch, $20. Come take my job.
It's Joe Wilson.
It's tough enough to stand up here as it is. You may be tough, but you better be damn tough, is all I can say. All right, now listen, you got to be careful what you wish for.
Hey, you better let me hold that.
Not a chance,
He's a
man.
liberal, he'll spend
All I can say is the kind of year you guys have had, I'll take it. I know you've had lean years and all that, but man, I pay the prices for these things. Christ, you kids, $15 for a burger anymore. But I'm happy for you. By the way, one thing we didn't mention is the threat to you. And if the American politicians don't get this through their heads soon, they will. China is the enemy of the United States. Yeah. They have been for years. They are taking our economy. They don't like us. They won't buy your beef. They rip off everything that we make, and then they sell us toys with lead in them. I mean, come on. But anyway, so be careful what you wish for. There's an old story about this. Two brothers. There was the older, more serious brother, Cal, and the younger, friskier brother, Bob. And they die in a car wreck. And they're young. Go to the pearly gates, and they say, St. Peter, we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be dead. We're young. St. Peter said, I'm having a bad day, too. So I'll tell you what, you go back down to earth for 6 months, and you can be whatever you want, but you can't be human because you're dead. So what do you want to be? So the serious older brother, Cal, says, I want to be an eagle. Fine, he's an eagle. Ask the younger brother, Bob. Bob says, I want to be a stud. Fine. 6 months go by, they don't come back, and Peter calls the angel Gabriel and says, Gabriel, we're not going to get those two brothers. The older brother, Cal's not going to be hard to find. He's an eagle someplace over the Grand Canyon, Golden Gate Bridge. The younger brother, Bob's going to be a little bit more difficult because he's a 2x4 in a condominium someplace in New Mexico. So be careful. Be careful what you wish for. In the presidential race, I'll wrap up this on the political side of this with this. We're under very strict orders here. I noticed that your leadership was stuck to their script as well. That's fine. It was good speeches, sort of. No, they were good. I liked them. By the way, Wendell, has anybody heard Wendell sing? He's unbelievable. The guy can sing. Where are you, Wendell? Oh, you don't listen to my speech. I sit around and listen to yours. All right. Anyway, presidential race is going to come down simply to this. Mitt Romney will get this nomination. Newt Gingrich will not get the nomination for all the reasons that those of us who know presidential politics. Now, I managed Walter Mondale to the largest loss in the history of American politics. Now I'm on TV as a political expert. It's a great country, isn't it? I don't know why you're laughing. You're paying me to be here. Newt is not going to be able to make it. The money's going to dry up. The pressures are going to build up, and Romney will get the nomination. And Romney has got problems, serious problems. Among independent voters, he was starting out the campaign season. It was 2-to-1 favorable among independents, now 2-to-1 negative. That's the price they've paid for this outrageously unattractive Republican presidential race. There are a lot of people sitting back there now wishing they'd gotten in this race. But I think in the end, the power of the incumbency, and you're not going to like this, but I'm telling you this as a straight analyst. Believe me when I tell you that these boys in Chicago, with almost $1 billion, a lot of them used to work for me. I feel sorry for for Romney, because it's going to be scorched earth. This guy's not going to know what hit him, because it is going to be the toughest, meanest, nastiest race on both sides. But Obama and the Chicago guys know how to play this business well. And in the end, Romney's going to have to come up with something besides what he said so far that I'm better than Obama. Romney's tax proposals, his big 25-page deal, he'll end up with a bigger deficit than Obama. He's going to have to come up and say something. He's going to have a message. And the message just can't be, I'm not Obama. That's fairly obvious. In the end, I think that Obama will win. It'll be close. But he will win, and he will win in the margin will come in a couple of Rocky Mountain states. And in the end, Romney will pick Rubio for his vice president. If he doesn't, he's nuts. They'll carry Florida, Ohio. I think that Romney will lose Ohio. because they don't think that Bain capital matters. Republicans all say, oh, it's fine, that's capitalism, that's the way it works. Don't kid yourself. Among an average American, when they see somebody making that kind of money, paying 13%, even though he paid it legally, it's something that they don't like to see. So there's a lot of things that look a lot different in the electorate than they do as you watch these Republicans and these Tea Party people. I know there's probably Tea Party people in here. Nice to see you. No, that's fine. You're great. But in the end, the Tea Party, which has exerted enormous influence over the Republican Party, and they did very well in 2010, will be a relatively insignificant part because there'll be 70 million new voters out that were not there in 2010. So I don't want to break your heart, but I do think Obama will get reelected, but Republicans will have a good year.
No wild applause, Bob. Well.
No, really?
Yeah.
That's a shock.
I know. Well, I don't do predictions because I'm not a prophet or the son of one, but anything can happen, and it probably will. And what looks true in February can be far less true in November. So I know you're big on doing away with the estate tax, so am I. But as long as we have it, then I think that we who are conservatives have a right to vote after we're dead too. Because, you know, the liberals do it all the time. No taxation without representation. So if they're going to tax the estate, you ought to be able to vote after you die. That'll make up for all those Democratic votes out there. I sense a mood and a tone in this room that I want to plug into at the moment. I think you probably had certain expectations about Bob before he walked out here, or just from watching him on television. But I sense that you may have at least a slightly different view of him now. Not that you necessarily believe in what he believes in, but perhaps that you don't see him in stereotype, as we so often see people of different persuasions or beliefs in our country. Again, radio and cable TV has ratcheted this up. This is one of the problems in Washington. People don't know each other anymore. When I was growing up, there were great party givers, social page people who gave these fantastic parties and invited people of all different backgrounds and persuasions. Members of Congress would stay for longer than they do now, usually 2.5 to 3 days a week. Their spouses would usually be there, which guarded against a lot of the silliness that we see in the tabloids now. The spouse would come home and say, usually women then, now we have more women in Congress, but they'd say, honey, look, I just met the wife of Senator so-and-so, and they're having some similar struggles with their kids as we are with ours. Maybe we should get together with them. And people knew each other, and they'd go out to dinner, and they weren't afraid to be seen together, Republicans and Democrats. Most of that is gone now. People don't know each other except by stereotype, liberal, conservative, right-wing, left-wing, Tea Party, you know, whatever. And it's really too bad. And it's one of the reasons for gridlock in Washington. Several years ago, my wife and I made a pilgrimage. We wanted to do it for years. Her dad was a naval, not an officer, he was a enlisted man in World War II. My dad and all of his brothers were in World War II. One of my uncles was in D-Day on Omaha Beach. So we went to Normandy in France. You've seen the pictures. Maybe some of you have been there. Reagan did this tremendous speech in 1984, the boys of Pointe du Hoc. It's unbelievable. You can't believe how anybody physically could get up that mountain just under normal conditions, much less under withering machine gun fire. And we stood in those places. And I went over to Omaha Beach, where my uncle had stormed ashore there in 1944. And then I walked around the American Cemetery, which is about as holy a ground as you can find on earth. All of those grave markers lined up in precision fashion. Most crosses, a few stars of David. Some of the greenest grass you will see outside of Ireland. There were no R's and D's on those grave markers. No, there were birth and death dates, some of them 18, 20, 25, a few sergeants, maybe 30 years old. Most of them would never marry or have a posterity. They weren't fighting for Franklin Roosevelt's re-election. They weren't fighting for a party. They were fighting for an ideal. America has always been an idea in search of the ideal. Have we failed? Many times. Certainly in slavery and civil rights, those are the more obvious ones, but in other ways too. But we keep pressing on toward, as the scriptures say, the high calling of God. And this is good. We always have the ideal before us to make us better. Bob isn't on the other side. We hear a lot of that talk these days in Washington and elsewhere. And by the way, if you have questions for us, begin to pass them to the aisle where they'll be collected. We're going to do a quick Q&A section at the end of this, which will occur in a moment. Bob isn't on the other side. The Taliban are on the other side. Let's put the enemies where they belong. Bob is my fellow American and my friend because I've gotten to know him at a very deep and personal level. I don't define him by his politics. He's much better and greater than that. And this is the problem in America. If somebody is of a different party or persuasion, we hate them because of that. Let's put our enemies where they belong. Bob's dad was in World War II, as you heard him say. He wasn't fighting for liberalism or for the Democratic Party. He was fighting for an America too. But there are special interests who make a lot of money by keeping us divided. I've seen some of this. I asked a fundraiser once for a major religious political organization in the 1980s, hey, how come you never send out a positive letter of what you're doing with people's money? And he said to me with a cold look, you can't raise money on a positive. Now, how cynical is that? How divisive is that? How un-American, yes, is that? Folks, if we don't get it right, there are plenty of people who want to destroy us, and not just the Muslim fascists. There are plenty of others. Bob mentioned China as well, stealing secrets we don't give them. We really are the last best hope on earth. If we don't support one another and our great diversity and pluralism while fighting within the rules and within the Constitution for what we believe in, that's the great wonder of America, that we can do this. Today, just concluded in Washington, there was something called the National Prayer Breakfast, the 60th year this has been held. We invite people from all over the world as well as Americans. People come from countries where if you lose an election, you imprison or kill your opponent. In America, we give up power willingly. And they come to this and they see this and they're overwhelmed by it because they've never seen that before. That is the greatness of America. Let's stop demonizing people who have different beliefs and see through a personal relationship if we can find common ground to, in the words of one of our great founding documents, promote the general welfare. Because in promoting the general welfare, we promote our own as well. Thanks.
You know, every time I hear Cal talk about that American cemetery, it reminds me of a number of things. But before I get serious here and we end this, we take your questions, I have to tell you about a game warden story. Game warden comes across this old boy out in the field and he's shot a bird and he's cooking it. And the game warden said, Bill, what do you got there? And he said, an egret. He said, well, Bill, that's an endangered species. You can't eat that. He said, well, I've been eating egrets all my life. Gives him a $150 ticket, turns around, walks away, and stops and looks back and says, by the way, what does an egret taste like? He said, oh, I don't know, somewhere between a bald eagle and a spotted owl. I forgot to get that in before. I wanted you to know that. That was my cattleman joke. When I hear Cal talk about that, I mentioned before, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been 3 weeks ago, I celebrated, by the grace of God, my 12th year of sobriety. That's my bookie, if you'll excuse me just for a second. That was your time was supposed to be done, Cal. That's what that was. But when I hear Cal talk about that, you know, I have as much right as anybody else in this country to have different points of view. I didn't agree with the Iraq War, still don't. Now, most of you probably did. But I'm an American and I have a right to do that. But when I was in my first few years of sobriety, I had no faith, none. If it didn't have skin and bones, it didn't exist. And I ran into some real serious trouble. I was getting divorced. I was married to a professional golfer for 6 years. She gave me 4 lessons, and it cost me about $500,000 a lesson when it was over. Tiger Woods has nothing over me. I've had a 5-iron coming in my head at 2 in the morning. And in the hands of a professional golfer, that's scary, boys, I'll tell you. Thank God for wallboard to slow that thing down. But I was getting a divorce, and I had a number of other things going on, and things were just really rough. And you know, I almost drank again after 5 years sobriety. And the first person who came to my aid is on here with me today. He didn't come as a conservative. He didn't come as somebody trying to be nice and befriend a little liberal. He came because he's my friend. And he and a few others saved my life because I don't have another out. I go out one more time, I'm gone, dead. I think consider every day that I live today. Every single day is by grace and grace alone. I should have been dead a long time ago. I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, and the good Lord kept me around for something, maybe just to antagonize you all, I don't know. But when I needed help, I didn't just turn to liberal friends to do that. It had nothing to do with that. And in the course of helping me, Cal became a vessel for me that I was able to find faith. And I had a very tough upbringing. My father was, suffice it to say, was a little mean. And now I have a father that loves me unconditionally. And that's a very warm feeling for a guy that grew up where I grew up. All this is to say that we want to ask you something as we close here. You probably know people you don't agree with politically, a lot of other things. Do us a favor, will you? Just the next time you see them, sit down and listen to each other. Just listen. You probably won't change your views, but at least you sit down and listen, because common ground is essential to the survival of this nation. It's that important. If we leave it up to these idiots in Washington, we're going to be in worse trouble than we've ever been in. It's got to start out at the grassroots. You can find somebody you don't agree with, and you can sit down and talk to them. And if nothing else, leave the table in a civilized way so you can come back and talk again. And in the end, if enough people do that, and we give this message every place we go, and people have started common ground chapters, a lot of things have happened that have been wonderful from this. And eventually these politicians are going to understand that to polarize and be negative and to be wingnuts or lefty nuts is not doing the people's business. And that's what they're hired to do. And they're not doing it. And we got to stop, because they're our incumbent, sending them back just because why? They can do other things, I think. They've been lobbyists, I guess. But we have got to do it from the roots on up. So do take some time and sit down with somebody and listen to them and hear them out. And you may find, interestingly enough, there's some things you can find common ground on. I'm going to end this by saying to my friend Cal Thomas, who has literally and figuratively saved my life through the grace of God. On behalf of Cal and I want to thank you all for being so nice to a liberal, number one. The sniper didn't show up, I guess. Or at least he didn't load his gun, I don't know. But I want to thank you for listening to hear us out. You're a great audience. You've listened and you hear me. You may not agree with me, but you've given me the honor and the respect to listen to me. And that's because you're an American and I'm an American, and that's what we do. We are the greatest single country in the world where debate can take place and you can walk off a stage alive and well and free. Thank you all very much.
Good job, man. There you go.
Good finish.
You're going to sit or stand?
Just stand.
Thanks. All right, thank you. We'll take some questions until somebody cuts us off or we see something on the screen here. We have people in the aisle. If you'd, how are we going to work this? You're going to ask some questions that have been written, or somebody come out in the aisle and ask them?
Well, we've got one for you right here.
Oh, very good.
Gentlemen, what do you think of the Obama administration's decision on the Keystone Pipeline? Because from our perspective, it looks like that's going to mean more oil for China rather than here in the United States.
I'll go first.
It's a bad decision. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why. See, I'm a believer. As I said, I'm a jobs liberal. And most job liberals, particularly a lot of my union friends and others, I mean, I find it hard to understand why our closest ally can't send energy that we need desperately here and provide jobs. And you're right, the alternative is going to China. As far as I'm concerned, nothing should go to China. So I think that they made a mistake, is the answer.
working in Houston as a young reporter in the 70s when some of these same arguments were made about the pipeline from Valdez to Prudhoe Bay. The caribou would be harmed, the environment would be destroyed. We heard the same old arguments. And I've been up there several times since then. The caribou are doing quite nicely. They're grazing there next to the pipelines. They're reproducing right on schedule. But the problem is with some of the political arguments in Washington, sometimes on both sides, is that even though one argument is proved not to be true, from whichever side it comes, that doesn't keep them from recycling the argument when the next issue comes along. And that's one of the things that frustrates Bob and me very much. You never can move ahead because you've got these groups that are locked into their ideology, not solutions, which would be something totally different, because again, you can't raise money on a positive. What would Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton do if racial harmony broke out in America? They'd have to get a real job. So you got to keep stirring the pot, and that's one of the problems. But I agree totally with him on that. Yes, another question.
Said Republicans and Democrats don't know each other and don't communicate.
Yeah.
Won't term limits make that worse?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe, but I think the upside of it is that you keep the politicians from catching that disease that I mentioned a few moments ago. If people knew that their terms were limited, say, to 3 maximum in the House and 2 in the Senate, then I think the possibility increases that they're actually going to do the people's business and not see this as careers. The founders never intended, and by their example, showed that they didn't want politics to be a full-time profession. One of my favorite stories on this I didn't mention in my formal remarks is my good friend, and he is my good friend, George McGovern. We used to debate a lot civilly in the 1980s together. When he lost in 1980 in the Reagan landslide and 5 liberal Democrat senators were defeated, he went up and bought an inn in Connecticut and tried to do something totally different, went bankrupt after a couple of years. Wall Street Journal called him up, wanted to know what happened. And he said, well, gee, if I'd known how difficult it was to run a business, I might have voted differently in the Senate. Now, that's the greatest argument for term limits I've ever heard. You get out of touch, you get the free parking, the discount haircuts, lots of young chicks running around saying how handsome and wonderful you are, and, then you wind up in the Minnesota toilet.
Just don't jump on the young chicks. I'm a bachelor, so I don't think that's necessarily a bad perk. It is exactly the reverse, to answer your question. If you've been there too long, you get yourself in positions of leadership, by definition forces you to become more partisan and polarizing. Some of the best legislation that we know that's introduced is introduced by freshman members together across aisles. Cal and I went up and interviewed Marco Rubio and Coons from Delaware, a Democrat, a very liberal Democrat. They've introduced a bill for jobs. Now, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell, who are two together of the ugliest human beings I've ever seen in my life. Honestly, this is a case of only a mother. These guys got along, decided they were going to do something about it. I guarantee if they'd been there 3 or 4 terms, they wouldn't have done it. So I think that this is quite the opposite. I think people are willing to go there with the idea that they want to work with each other.
Here, get the mic going. Speaking of the deficit, how do we deal with the deficit? What's your recommendation?
Stop spending. By now everybody's got the credit card bills from Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, right? So if the bill comes in, you've spent too much, normal people say, gee, honey, we're going to have to cut back a little bit until we get this paid off. Not government. They call up the Treasury and say, print more money, or they call the Chinese and borrow more money. We are in hock up to our fortune cookie with the Chinese. Those are the last bankers we need to have.
Let me just I disagree with that in more ways than I can possibly tell you. Look, they say Obama raised the deficit $5 trillion in his first 3 years. It's true. That deficit went up. But you know that $4.4 trillion of that would have happened for any president, and it comes down to one single thing. Unless and until the courage of both parties comes to the forefront and deals with entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unless we deal with that, we're kidding ourselves. Conservatives say, let's cut this, all these terrible pork barrel spending and all these education money and all the rest of it. It's nothing. It's minuscule. It means nothing. It makes for a great headline, But in the end, unless we're willing to say, because Social Security was never meant to be a social retirement fund. It never was. It was meant to be insurance. That's what they called it. And if you can afford not to take Social Security, you shouldn't take it. And Medicare is another thing. People are living a lot longer than anybody ever expected they were when they passed that thing. They have cost of living increases. My mother was 92 years old and had a $90,000 heart operation. That's crazy. I mean, that's my mother. And my brother and my sister and I sat there and argued and had a terrible quality of life, and she died. But, I mean, at some point here, we're going to have to recognize that these entitlement programs are going to eat us alive. All the other stuff the right-wing nuts like to talk about, and spending here and spending there, is nothing compared to that. And one last thing I'll tell you is, since 9/11, the United States government will next year spend on defense and defense-related expenditures more money than the entire world combined. That gets us back to this point. It's time somebody else starts pulling up this bill with us. They've got money. The Germans have got money. Why we have 50,000 troops sitting in Germany is beyond me. Why we have them in South Korea to defend against a nuclear shield against the North Koreans is beyond me. Japan, we don't need to do this. Or if we're going to do it, they can pay us to do it.
All right, we have time for one more question, it says here.
We have another question talking about the election process. What's your answer to the media's control over the electoral process?
Well, I've written a couple of columns on this. I don't think the candidates, first of all, there's no constitutional mandate for even holding debates. But if you're going to have them, why do they continue to show up and let the media set the rules and have these little gotcha questions and stupid questions? You know, if you were a tree, what kind would you be? And what was that idiot question they asked? What kind of first lady would your wife make? Oh, please! We've got serious financial and relational problems with the rest of the world, and they ask idiotic questions like that. I think there ought to be a mixture of questioners that goes beyond the standard, mostly liberal journalists who ask Republicans one kind of question and Democrats another kind of question. I like to see a panel that includes once in a while Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity. Now that would be one I would tune in, but have them ask the question of the Democrats.
Be careful what you wish for on
Yeah.
that, brother. Let me just say, you know, this old line about the mainstream media and all, they used to be very powerful. There's no question about it. But in this day and age, the amount of information available that comes into people's households, unfiltered, through blogs, through other websites, through cable television, it overwhelms mainstream media, or whatever Sarah Palin calls it, from Walissa. Now, she's one of my colleagues. I better be careful here. But leaving that aside, she put in her contract she didn't want to be with me on the air, which got beaten, so I don't hold any resentments. But in the end, what's problem is here, there's so much information flowing out there, it's unfiltered, and people with a certain ideology will go to where the information that confirms their ideology is. And that's the problem. There's too much of it. And it is not controlled by some group of people in New York City. That's just a myth. There's a lot of it going. Go on the internet. You'll find it wherever it is. So, having said that, I read your newspaper. It was really interesting. I was particularly well, never mind. I'll get into that later.
Thanks for having
anyway,
us. We
thank you
appreciate
very much.
it.